So Barnes & Noble is now doing a sale on Criterion Collection, Blu-rays, and 4Ks. And today I want to talk to you about 15 movies that Criterion put out that I highly recommend. So yeah, you can go to Barnes & Noble, get these for 50% off right now. The sale goes through December 2nd. Or heck, just find them on streaming, find a way to watch them. They're probably on the Criterion channel or HBO Max, whatever. These are just good movies. Let's talk about them. So first up, I want to talk about this Val Lewton double feature that Criterion just put out on 4K. And I kind of want to bring it up to put it on your radar because I feel like nobody is talking about this. It was put out in October. And I remember like everybody talking about the Criterion announcements that month was like, nothing good here, a disappointing slate. Guys, no, for me, this is the most exciting release from Criterion all year. So these are two horror films put out by Val Lewton. You probably know him. He was a producer back predominantly in the 1940s who put out a lot of unusually thought-provoking and subtly nuanced horror films, kind of unusual for the time period. And like he made Cat People, that got put out on Blu-ray by Criterion. But these were the last two of his big horror films that had not been on Blu-ray yet. And they're out on 4K now, which is so exciting. Now, I picked this up because of I Walked with a Zombie predominantly. That is one of my favorite zombie movies of all time. It's not a very traditional zombie film. It is like almost predominantly a romance film and a really good like gothic romance, kind of in the tradition of Jane Eyre or something like that. But then also it is a voodoo zombie movie. So it's not like what you would typically see from George Romero years later. This is all about voodoo. This is about local folk practices and rituals in the Caribbean and stuff. So it's almost kind of a folk horror movie, and I absolutely love I Walked with a Zombie. I can't wait to watch it on 4K. I haven't popped this in yet. I just got it, but I'm so excited. And The Seventh Victim it comes with as well, so I guess I snuck 16 movies into this video. And The Seventh Victim is not near as good, but it is good. It is a satanic cult movie, a very early example of a satanic cult film. Now, it's not going to show you pretty much anything that you probably expect to see today in a satanic cult film. It's very subtle. It almost plays more like a noir film, but it is good. So I do highly recommend this 4K release, or just check these out on streaming, like I said. So next up, here's one that I just picked up as well, and I've already watched. This was a blind buy for me. This is Demon Pond. This is a 1970s Japanese folk horror fantasy movie. I would almost say a little bit more fantasy than horror, although it's got its horror elements. It's based on apparently a classic Japanese kabuki play. It's about a guy who is traveling on foot and he goes through this area that's going through a terrible drought. But then he comes up to one small community where they actually have water, and it's because of a demon pond. And a lot of the villagers around, they don't want to drink from this pond. But he finds a friend of his there who he lost many years ago, and he finds out this friend stayed there because he considers it his job to ring a bell 3 times a day, because there's this legend that if the bell doesn't get rung 3 times a day, then this dragon god and other spirits will come out of the demon pond and flood the whole area and kill everyone. So he considers this his duty. And this movie is an interesting experience because sometimes it's very slow. It's a little bit long. It's over 2 hours. And it does very slowly move through this story, very subtle. But then sometimes you will go visit the dragon god, which it isn't going to look like a dragon. Don't get your hopes up to that. And the spirits, and then it's very fantastical. It's very heightened. There's a lot of artifice to it. Theatrical is the word. You can tell it was based on a play. So it kind of goes back and forth between the very subtle world of humans and this very subtle romance going on, and then the big crazy theatrical world of the spirits. So this isn't like a super high recommendation. I didn't absolutely love this movie, but I thought it was very interesting. And if you're just looking for some weird fantasy folk horror thing from Japan, yeah, check out Demon Pond. It's got an absolutely awesome cover. This one did get released on 4K. I just got the Blu-ray. Most of the time with Criterion, when they release a Blu-ray and a 4K, I go for the Blu-ray because it's going to be at least $5 cheaper. And, it's going to be a 4K scan that's just put onto a Blu-ray. Criterion Blu-rays look fantastic, so I never have a problem with how they look for sure. And the packaging is exactly the same. So I picked up the Blu-ray. I think that was a good choice because it looked great, but you can get it on 4K if you want. Okay, next up, people this time of year, like November, December, going into those cold months, people start talking a lot about cozy movies. What's a cozy movie to just curl up on the couch, maybe with your significant another and just watch a really nice film. That's what this is. This is All That Heaven Allows. This is from 1955, and it's a Douglas Sirk movie. Now, Douglas Sirk made a lot of melodramas back in predominantly the 1950s, and at the time they were called women's pictures, but I wouldn't let that put you off if you're a dude, for sure. This is an awesome melodrama. I realize that sounds kind of weird to say out loud, an awesome melodrama, but yeah, what it's about is it's about a woman. She is a widow. She is going into her middle age. She's probably like early 40s, and her kids are now grown, and she's alone. You know, her kids are doing their own thing. She doesn't have a husband anymore, and she meets Rock Hudson, who is actually her gardener. He is a younger man. Of course, he's super handsome, and he's into her, and he starts making a move, and she's now thrown in a situation of like, what do I do? Like, what are my rich friends going to think if I start dating the much younger gardener? You know, it's not socially acceptable, and her kids kind of have a problem with it. They think it's really weird, but they start this really beautiful romance, and it's really just this unconventional romance story about the two of them. It's very nice. It's actually one of the few dramas that I have rewatched. Dramas, I don't tend to rewatch them very much. Like, I rewatch horror movies and comedies for like comfort food. But dramas are usually one and done for me. But All That Heaven Allows, it's under 90 minutes. It's beautiful color. It's really entertaining. I love the performances. It's kind of really good, very simple message about keeping in mind what is important in life and not sweating the small stuff. It's delivered very well. And it's a perfect movie for this time of year because it is about the changing of the seasons. Because it starts out, it's one of the most beautiful fall autumnal movies you'll ever see in your life. But then like the second half of the movie moves into winter, starts moving into Christmas time. So it's like an ultimate November movie. So I highly recommend All That Heaven Allows, even if you're not usually into like, you know, dramas, melodramas, romantic dramas. It's not a big thing for a lot of people in the movie community. This is a really good one. Douglas Sirk is really good at that, and I love this. Next up, Anatomy of a Murder. Now, this is another 1950s movie that I might not have super expected to be my thing, but it is. It is an almost 3-hour courtroom drama. It's about 2 hours and 40 minutes, and you're probably thinking like, I'll probably pass on that. No, this movie is so awesome. Now, I put this on one night, fully expecting to watch half of it and watch the other half the next night. Because I don't tend to have a lot of movie watching time in the evenings before I got to go to bed because I got to get up for work in the morning. And I just didn't have time to watch an almost 3-hour movie. So I thought, I'll split it up. I could not turn this off. I stayed up super late to finish this thing. It was so intriguing. I was so into it. I just could not turn it off. So it's directed by Otto Preminger, kind of an iconic classic film director, and it's starring Jimmy Stewart as this kind of small time lawyer who gets picked to defend this guy in a murder case. And the murder case is really interesting because from the beginning of the movie, you know the guy did it. The guy killed this dude. And what the trial is really about is, why did he do it? Can they prove it was justifiable? And can they make him look good enough to the jury to at least get a lenient sentence? I thought that was fascinating because it's not a murder mystery, right? Like, you're not trying to figure out like who did it. It is all about the mechanics of being a lawyer and it's like theater. It's like positioning every situation, positioning each witness and your client in just the right way to just get on the good side of the jury so you can maybe get off or you can maybe get a lenient sentence or something like that. And I thought it was fascinating. Like, Jimmy Stewart is incredible in this movie. He's so interesting and likable, but also like a little bit slimy at times when he needs to be, that he just makes for a fascinating lead character. I just loved him. You've also got, who's that actress in here? Lee Remick. Lee Remick as the accused man's wife. So good, so gorgeous in this movie. So I loved Anatomy of Murder. It is a almost 3-hour black and white courtroom drama, but don't let that fool you. It's incredible. Next up, here is another, this one's from the 1960s. This is John Frankenheimer's Seconds. This is actually another movie starring Rock Hudson. So this is kind of a science fiction horror film, and it is about this guy who's going through a midlife crisis, and he's unhappy. His marriage is boring. His job is boring. His life isn't terrible, but he's just bored. And from a friend of his, he finds out about this service of this company that can make you somebody different and give you a different life. And what it is he goes through this procedure, through this plastic surgery procedure. And when he comes out of it, he's Rock Hudson. He looks like Rock Hudson. That's a pretty good deal, right, fellas? We would love to go through that. And they set him up perfectly to have this completely other life. They kill off his old self. And it's about him trying to adjust to that, and maybe he can't, and maybe things get really creepy and horrifying as it goes. I love this. It is like an existential dread horror movie. Like, that's the kind of horror it is. Not slasher kills, not vampires and werewolves, existential dread. Like that, and it's so good. I just thought it was fascinating. And John Frankenheimer is just an incredible director. He's made so many cool movies. And it's probably Rock Hudson's best performance. So like, he's really compelling in this film. Love Seconds. Okay, next up, let's talk about a Western. This is The Gunfighter. So my buddy Frank over at the Frank's Media and Reviews YouTube channel, great channel, he was talking in a live stream recently about how he wants to get into Westerns, but he doesn't feel like he's really into that subgenre and isn't quite sure what to watch. I recommended The Gunfighter to him, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's not really into Westerns. By the way, kind of my goal with this list was to pick movies that are a little bit different than everybody else is recommending for the Criterion sale. And I think The Gunfighter fits in with that. It's not one a lot of people talk about, but it is basically a deconstruction of a Western in showing how being a traditional Western hero sucks. Like, it is a miserable life. It's about Gregory Peck, who is the fastest gun in the West. Ringo, right? Yeah, Jimmy Ringo is his name. He is the fastest gun in the West, so you think he's got it made. He is the man. Everybody respects him. They know he's the biggest badass. But the problem is everybody else wants to be the fastest gun in the West, right? Like, they don't want to just let him have that title. Someone else wants it. So anytime he goes into a town, somebody wants to kill him. There's some guy who just wants to gun him down just so that they can now be the guy who killed Jimmy Ringo. But the problem is he is the fastest gun in the West, so he kills them. Like, they pull their gun, he's faster. He shoots them dead. And he doesn't want to go from town to town killing people, even though it's justifiable because it's self-defense. He's not going to jail, but it's a miserable life. And he can't have a traditional life. He can't be with his family. He can't have a home. And it's sad, but it's also a very intense movie. Just a movie about a guy just trying to get the traditional American dream. He just can't reach it because the only way he can get rid of this title that's holding his life back is by dying, is by getting gunned down. It's from 1950 in black and white. It's beautifully shot. It's in 1:33 aspect ratio, which makes it have like a very, very tall look to the cinematography. It looks gorgeous. And I think it's one of Gregory Peck's best performances. Incredible. And as long as we're talking about Westerns, let's talk about one more before we move on. This is Buckin' the Preacher. This is a 1972 Western. So we're going quite a bit forward in time from that last one. And it's starring Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, and it's directed by Sidney Poitier as well. This was his directorial debut. So it's a very unusual in that it's a classic Western about black characters. And it's a very interesting story that you could only tell with black characters being in the lead, because it is about right after the Civil War, where slavery is now illegal, all the slaves go free. But the problem is a lot of the slave owners in the South, they won't really give that up without a fight. Even though they don't have legal standing, they'll probably kill you if you try to leave. So it's about Sidney Poitier as this badass guy whose job is to escort newly freed slaves out of the South and into the North, where probably nobody's going to try to hurt them. So that's like a great story. And that's a story about the Old West that's just not often told. So it's really cool to get to see it. And then Harry Belafonte is this weirdo guy who at least pretends to be a preacher, who kind of hooks up with Sidney Poitier, and they become buddies, and they do this mission together. And I think Harry Belafonte gives one of the greatest, like, weirdo eccentric supporting performances I've ever seen. Like, think Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean as Jack Sparrow. Think Val Kilmer in Tombstone as Doc Holliday. That is the kind of performance you're going to get. Like, that good, that weird and eccentric and really successful. I think Harry Belafonte, like, secretly one of the great actors of his time. He's awesome in this. So the truth of this movie is it is a very feel-good, traditional, good versus evil Western about a traditional archetype hero and his weird eccentric partner trying to do the right thing. And it's so satisfying. So I love this movie. Highly recommend it. Next up, let's talk about Eve's Bayou. So this is actually going forward in time from a lot of my picks. This is 1997. And the opening line of this film, and it's the first line you're going to see on the back of the Blu-ray. So this isn't a spoiler. It tells you right up front. It says, "The summer I killed my father, I was 10 years old." And that's what you get from the narration. And then you get this story. You get the story about this 10-year-old girl. She really loves her father. Her father is played by Samuel L. Jackson. He is like kind of one of the top men of his community. He has a really good social standing. He is the doctor. He's very charming and handsome. Everybody loves him. And he's got a beautiful wife, great kids, great house. He's living the dream. The only problem is he just can't keep his hands off other women. And he just keeps cheating on his wife. And everybody like knows it, but it's this unspoken thing. And it's putting a real strain on his family behind the scenes. And it's also like a supernatural witchy story, except they call it voodoo. And that stuff's really cool. So it's a little bit of a horror film in addition to just being a really good character drama and period piece drama. It takes place like in the 1960s. And that's another thing I like about this movie. It's about all black characters in the 1960s, but it's not about racism. Like it feels like anytime black characters get to be in a period piece, it's just got to be about one subject, racism. That's it. And Bayou doesn't deal with that. It's about these characters doing other things, other parts of their lives. And I really appreciated that. So it's a great like Southern Gothic film. It's got a great vibe to it. Good voodoo content, great performances. Really enjoyed this movie. Next, let's talk about Todd Browning's Freaks. This is one of the most exciting Criterion announcements ever for me. I had this movie on DVD, a pretty bad-looking DVD. It's only looked pretty bad in all of its home video releases, but they cleaned it up for Criterion. It now looks great. It is a pre-code 1932 horror film about a circus carnival, and it's about the freaks, the people there who work as sideshow performers in the freak show. And this was a thing in this time period. And the filmmakers used actual people who have certain afflictions, deformities, things like that. So it's very authentic in that way, which is very interesting. And it's just a weird, kind of disturbing horror movie that came out pre-code. So they were allowed to go a little bit further on certain subject matter than before the Hays Code, the censorship really kicked into gear. And this is just a really, really cool release. It's like a cool digipack, and it's actually a 3-pack. So it's got 2 other films directed by Todd Browning, great director of old horror movies. The Unknown, which is a silent film starring Lon Chaney that's kind of also about a circus and is really good. Just loved that. And The Mystic, which is another silent film that I've not seen yet. So I've got more work to do on this set, but very much recommend it. It's so colorful too. It looks so cool. And as long as we're in like a little bit of a horror block, I want to shout out 2 other movies, not official picks. Those are The Uninvited and Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. Not official picks on this list because I feel like I've talked about these movies so much lately. I think I've talked about them to death. So that's a classic 1940s haunted house film, one of my favorites. That is a 1970s weird fantasy folk horror vampire kind of thing. And I love them both, highly recommend them both, but I've talked about them to death. So let's move on. Next, let's talk about classic noir. I love noir films, those 1940s, 50s movies about like criminals and cops and just existential dread of that time period. And this is one of my favorites. This is In a Lonely Place. It's starring Humphrey Bogart as a writer, and there is a murder of somebody that he kind of knows at the beginning of the movie, and he is suspected. But nothing can be proved. He goes free. He starts this romance with Gloria Graham, who's one of my favorite actresses of old film noir movies. She was also in It's a Wonderful Life. She's like the kind of bad girl of that, so you've probably seen her in that. And they have this like really great romance, and like you get really invested in it. You care so much about her, and by proxy, you care about him. But there's this thing in the back of her mind. Did he kill that girl? Maybe. They never found out who did. He could have. There's no proof. But did he do it? And like, that's the position this movie puts you in as an audience member. Like, you like this guy, you think, but he's also got kind of a temper, and you want him to be better for the sake of her because you care about her. But is he a murderer? And you just don't know. And it's so interesting, and it leads to an incredibly intense, emotionally powerful climax that I'm not going to spoil it for you. You probably won't be able to guess it. It's a very unexpected movie, and it's probably Humphrey Bogart's best performance. What? Even over Casablanca? Probably even over Casablanca. He's amazing in this. Here's another kind of noir film, kind of horror movie. This is Nightmare Alley. It kind of rides that line of like, it a lot of times gets called a noir. It doesn't feel a lot like one. Maybe a little bit of a horror movie, especially because of the title, but I don't know. It's a genre bender. But Nightmare Alley is from the 1940s. and it stars Tyrone Power as a handsome, talented guy who works at a carnival, but he's ambitious. He wants to move up, and he gets the mentalist there, which is basically just the person who knows certain tips and tricks in order to read people and has like a code with their assistant to be able to read the minds of the audience members. It's not real, but it's a good show. So he learns that skill, and he gets really good at it, and he gets very famous and successful pretending to be a mentalist. The only problem is he doesn't let it be known that it's all fun and games. Like, he really does pretend to be psychic, Sean Spencer style, you know what I'm saying? But he keeps going further and further with it, with his ambition to get more and more money, almost trying to be a spiritual religious leader. And it's basically just about how far a very handsome, talented guy can go who is dishonest, and what kind of places will it lead to. And it's a very good movie. It's great. It's a very good movie. It's got very good carnival atmosphere to it. It's got some really disturbing parts that I actually didn't understand from this movie because it's from the 1940s. It's got to be kind of subtle about things. And I had to Google certain things to figure out, oh, like that's what's going on. That's really sick. And Guillermo del Toro actually remade this movie, and his remake is very good as well. And that one gets more explicit about those things. So this is the subtler version, the classier version, you might say, but it's very good. And it's a really, really cool release from Criterion. It's got like these tarot cards in there, and really, really dig it. Next, a classic screwball comedy. This is The Lady Eve, and it is actually my favorite classic screwball comedy of all time. A screwball comedy, if you don't know, is basically a romantic comedy most of the time, but just a little bit wackier than just like a traditional romantic comedy, like pretty just crazy. And The Lady Eve stars Henry Fonda as a sweet, good-natured, but pretty naive rich kid, like the son of a rich family, who's on a boat traveling back from a scientific expedition he was on, and he meets Barbara Stanwyck, who is a con artist. And she seduces him in some unusually sexy scenes for this time period. Like, you might even be surprised how far this movie goes. And they have this romance because she's going to take him for all he's worth because he's this rich guy. But the problem is she really does fall for him, and they have this actual love. But he finds out she's a con artist, he kicks her to the curb, and she decides to get some revenge. And you get some really wacky, zany stuff in this. I mean, the movie's directed by Preston Sturges, written and directed. He was one of the first, like, writer-directors in Hollywood. Usually those are always separate people. So he was kind of like an early auteur. His movies tend to be really wacky and unrealistic in really fun ways, and this one definitely is. Henry Fonda, this is such a weird role for him, but he's so funny. Barbara Stanwyck, I mean, I dare you not to fall in love with her watching this. I mean, she's just so wonderful. And it's hilarious. It is romantic. It is one of the most fun rom-coms I've ever seen. Love it. And look at that cover. Look how fun that is. Just love it. And then here's another romantic comedy, but kind of an unusual one. This is Jonathan Demme's Something Wild. I believe it's from 1986. And what this is about is Jeff Daniels, who is, actually, you know what? Kind of similar movies a little bit. Something Wild is like a modern update on the classic screwball comedy. But Jeff Daniels is this kind of hapless, naive guy who works a boring job, and he meets Melanie Griffith, and she is this wild, crazy, free spirit, and he gets sucked in by her, and she takes him on this wild road trip, and he just kind of lets his hair down and decides to have a good time for the first time in his life, and they have this really sweet romance. A classic trope of the screwball comedy is kind of like a little bit of a traditional gender reversal where you get kind of like this weak guy and this crazy, just wild woman, and they go on adventures together. Bringing a Baby, that's another good one from the Criterion Collection I would recommend. It's very much that. That's what Something Wild is. But the only thing is, partway through this movie, this very fun rom-com, Ray Liotta shows up. Ray Liotta is in this film, and he completely changes the tone and trajectory and genre of this film. And that's what makes it so interesting. A romantic comedy, but something much more unexpected. Ray Liotta is incredible in this. So Something Wild is actually one of my favorite movies of all time. I actually showed it to a group of friends once. While I do a movie marathon for my birthday every year. I showed this one year. It killed. Everybody loved it. So I can't recommend Something Wild enough. And then another more modern movie, well, the 80s, more modern by the movies I've been talking about, is Thief. This is from 1981. Michael Mann's Thief. Michael Mann is a pretty legendary director of like crime movies and stuff. Thief is by far my favorite of his films. It stars James Caan in probably his best performance as a professional thief. And what's really interesting, what I really love about this movie, is the thief stuff, the crime content, is good. It's tense. Good stuff. But it's the character drama aspect of this movie that really gets me. It is really about James Caan wanting to get out of that life, not wanting to be a professional thief anymore, doing that whole like one last score before I retire sort of thing. What he really wants is the traditional American dream. He wants a wife, a kid, a white picket fence, live in a nice neighborhood, but he hasn't like lived the life to earn that. He's lived a life of crime. So he's just trying to force it into existence. And here's one thing that I've learned through my time watching movies, is a movie can get you to root for pretty much anybody if they're an underdog and you really feel like James Caan is this underdog. He wants that life so bad and you want it for him when you're watching this, even though you know, like, not a good guy. He doesn't really deserve it necessarily. But like, he's fighting so hard to just have a normal life and you root for him so much. I cared so much about him and Tuesday Weld, who plays his love interest in this. I cared so much that this movie got so intense for me. Like, it was nail biting by the end of it because I just wanted everything to work out, and I'm not going to spoil it for you how it goes. It's so tense. And Thief is incredible. It's also got a beautiful score by Tangerine Dream, beautifully directed by Michael Mann. So awesome. Definitely one of my favorite blind buys I've ever done from Criterion. But my favorite blind buy that I've ever done from Criterion is They Live by Night. This is a classic noir film, and it's my favorite noir of all time. It stars Farley Granger and Kathy O'Donnell. Now, Farley Granger is this young guy who was in prison. We never really know why, but it seems like, you know, he was just a dumb kid. He doesn't really deserve a life of punishment, but he's in prison. But he breaks out with these career criminals. He kind of, you know, follows them, is able to break out, and he meets Kathy O'Donnell, who is this weird but very pretty young woman, and they have this instant connection. They just fall for each other, and they run off, get married, and go on the run. And this is another movie like Thief, about people who just desperately want the American dream, and it is so hard to attain. It is so difficult, and you want it for them so bad. Because when I watch this film, I care so much about Farley Granger and Kathy O'Donnell. I want the best for them. They're these very sweet people. They love each other so much. You know that, like, they would just be great people. They would be great members of their community. They'd be a great couple. They'd be great parents if they could have that chance. But Farley Granger is an escaped convict, and the police are always hot on their tail, and they can never relax, you know? And it puts this strain on their relationship. It's a beautiful film. It's very tense, and it's very emotional. This is the only noir film that makes me cry. Like, noir is not an emotional genre for me necessarily, but They Live by Night is the one. This is the really emotional one, and I love this film so much. Can't recommend it enough. So that's my list, but what about you? What are some films from the Criterion Collection that you would recommend? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you want to hang out with me even more, you can check out this video right over here and subscribe for more videos like this. We'll definitely have some more fun coming on the way. So thank you so much. Don't forget to enjoy yourself today. Have some fun, and I'll see you next time.